side note, I was at one event, and a teacher told me that she prefers to have paperback books because a lot of her students, I think she taught kindergarten or first grade, but she said a lot of her students didn't even know what physical books were, and they didn't know how to turn pages. They had only worked with, the ebook. So
electronic stuff.
yeah, they had no idea what is this page? What is this?
Courtney is devastated by what you're saying right now.
Yeah, I was too. I was too.
Like, well, I cannot believe that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So then continuing, Courtney, for you, I imagine you probably had an idea of what this book was going to look like, but what was that process like, figuring that out? And then did you use an illustrator for it? is it available ebook as well? What are your books? How have you made that decision?
So initially, when I had the idea for A is for Anacostia, and remember I told you I started out with that one kindergarten class, right? And then kind of grew into multiple kindergarten classes and throughout the grades in my school. I thought I was just going to go to Kinko's. Honestly, I was like, well, I'll have an idea. I'll hire an illustrator, because if it was left up to me, it would be a book full of stick figures. Mm-hmm. And I'll hire an illustrator and I'll go to Kinko's and I'll, print out about 30, 40 copies, and then I'm done. And then after I figured out, there's no way I'm going to have a story and then it will have, a little plastic binding at Kinko's. No, this should look like a real book for my students in the school. And I thought, okay, I have an idea of what I want to put into it, but it was fairly vague. I knew about my students in the school that I wanted to look, and I took pictures. I had pictures of being in the classroom with my students. And I thought, okay, I'm going to need this for an illustrator. I worked with Jerry Craft, award-winning Jerry Craft, and he was a marvelous first-time illustrator to work with me because he made the process so easy and so simple, and he really set the foundation for working with other illustrators in the future. So for our process at that time, I would do some research on my community, Historic Anacostia, and then I would email that to him. And then I would email him pictures of the students and get ideas of what I wanted. And then really after that, I kind of gave him artistic license. He's the expert in that area. Go ahead, work your magic. And so I allowed him. And so we would go back and forth, usually late at night online, on the phone and online. We're sending pictures and illustrations back and forth just to see what it looks. Do I like this? Do I like that? And yes, I had a number of revisions, but I'm talking about after he would create maybe half the book in this kind of blue outline. And he would say, okay, in general terms, what do you like, don't like, that sort of thing. Yeah. And I wasn't really specific on, this person has to look like my father because I mentioned that there's a barber in the story. It wasn't that serious, no. Just in general, I gave him general guidelines, and then I allowed him to work his magic. And so after that, we just kind of went back and forth.
That's so cool too, because you're already doing something that traditionally an editor in a publishing house would do, right? Like they're the ones who are hiring that illustrator, figuring out, letting me, usually, at least when I worked in publishing, it was a very, separation of church and state. The writer wasn't even talking to the illustrator. It was like, here, the illustrator is going to bring your vision to life. What platform did you use to get those physical books? How did that idea and then those beautiful illustrations turn into that physical book?
So I decided that I wanted to have hardcover books as well as softcover books. Now, let me tell you this, be very candid with fellow writers here. When I started to find out how much, I started to research, how much would it cost because I love hardcover books. And I love hardcover books with dust jackets that match the cover of the hardcover book. I love all that stuff. But you know what? They're very expensive. Very expensive. And so you really have to price out, I have parents, they're buying Happy Meals for kids, and for one kid that could run them $10. So now I've converted everything into the price of a book. So when I first started, my books were $10 for a soft cover. And for a hardcover, I think it may have started maybe $15 to $17, something like that. So then I had to price out, does it make sense to, maybe I should just have it available as an option for parents if they want to buy the $10 book, or do they want to buy the $15 to $17 book? Because they could buy a Happy Meal and my softcover book, or they could buy one hardcover book. I'm trying to balance out how to get that book out in as many little hands as possible. So that was the goal. And so as a result, I only had the only options were softcover, hardcover, and I've never had an electronic cover at all to date. This third book that I'm working on, F is for Family Reunion. For the first time, I'm going to offer that as an electronic copy.
We're gonna have to circle back to you and
I'm
hear
excited.
how that goes. Sienna, how about you? How are you figuring these things out? I mean, at this point, 60, by the way, everyone, you heard correctly. It was not 16, it was 60 books. I imagine you could teach a whole class. Oh, wait, you do teach a whole class on this, but what was that process like, figuring out format and ebook versus print, all of that?
It was a lot harder in the beginning. Back in 2011, 2012, sometimes we were hand coding HTML to do ebooks. It was difficult. And then the first piece of software came along, Scrivener, and you could export long form fiction very easily into both paperbacks and ebooks. And then we got Vellum, which was unbelievably amazing if you had a Mac, because then with one button, you could spit out the Apple version, you could spit out the Barnes & Noble version, the Google Play version, the Kobo version, the Kindle version, and the paperback. And they were gloriously beautiful because Vellum creates like parameters for you that you can't screw up. Like, I want the font bigger, and you can go bigger, 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 and then it stops going bigger at some point because Vellum's like, no, you're outside of what a normal book would be like. Or if you go smaller, 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 I'm like, nope, that's as small as you can go. And the spacing between the lines is figured out for you. The table of contents is put in for you. And oh, wow, what a difference it made when we got that piece of software. And now there's Atticus, which is a little less expensive. You can get it on PC or Mac. And gosh, if you're doing a book today, it's just so much easier to create an electronic version of a book than it was back then. So back then we had to think about how are we going to do it? And now really there's software out there to help you. As far as deciding what formats.
You know what, I'm going to stop you. I'm going to stop you for a second. Will you name check the software that you just mentioned again? So you said Atticus, and then do you still recommend, was it Zella?
Vellum.
Okay.
And Scrivener are the three ones that can do it. And that you some people hire a formatter. I always encourage people to learn something, because if you have a typo or something, you want to be able to fix it yourself. Those pieces of software make self-publishing possible. But as far as deciding the format, I've always done an electronic book. It doesn't matter if it's a picture book, or if it's a nonfiction book, or if it's a long form. I recently did a book with my adopted son called Conversations with Little Dude. And all it was like little 1-page conversations. And there were like 40 of them, which is really small. But we still did the ebook, we still did the paperback, and we still did the hardcover. And the great thing about doing all three formats is the hardcover felt like something, even though it was only like 48 pages. And libraries have been buying it because it's in hardcover. And that's definitely a consideration if you have a book that libraries are likely to pick up, even if it's expensive to like for a random person to buy. The libraries will do that because it's going to last so much longer. It's worth it to them to buy that more expensive version. So anytime you feel like you have a book you want in libraries, you want to go that route and have that hardcover. My questions these days aren't so much ebook, paperback. It's whether I'm going to do a hardcover version and whether I'm going to do an audio book version, because audio is a whole nother kettle of fish. It costs about $4,000 to get a good audiobook developed. And that's a lot of money. And even with 60 books and me hitting bestseller lists, that isn't always a great investment for me. So I have to make sure that I've thought about the market for this book. Do I think it's going to do well in audio? Is it the sort of book that is best in audio, that would be great or fun or to listen to? And of the 60 books I have, I've only done six of them in audio. So that's always my consideration.
I love that you mentioned audio, because it is just more than ever now, such a growing part of the industry. And so what advice can you give to folks who are listening, who are just now a light bulb's going off and they're like, oh, great, now I have to think about whether I'll do my book in audio. What tidbit can you say in terms of how you started to figure out whether that book was a good fit for audio or not?
Well, first of all, you have to, the way an audio is most likely to earn out its expenses or at least do well is you've got to be able to release it the exact same day as your paperback and your ebook. And that is not as easy as you would think, because there's a process that it goes through where it has to be vetted. And that process can take 2 days or 2 weeks, and you have no control over it. Last Christmas, I had a book that for Christmas, my very first Christmas book, and I thought I'm going to do a simultaneous audio hardcover special edition that I sold only on my website, a paperback that was broadly distributed, plus the Kindle Unlimited Amazon exclusive ebook. And I'm like, this is going to kill it. We're going to do great. And then the audiobook, I was sweating bullets because it was time for release and they hadn't approved it. And I kept, writing them like.
Say is it the platforms that they live on, that it lives on. Yeah.
So when you have audio, they have to approve that audio, because people could turn in just something from their iPhone and that's not going to work for an audiobook. It's a whole process. It has to be engineered. To do it yourself would take quite a lot of technical knowledge. So I have to think about whether that book is going to be one I can simultaneously release with audio, because I've written it so far in advance that I've given a couple extra months for the process of having it narrated, edited, technically produced, submitted, assume that there's going to be problems, and then still gotten there on time. And I write on a pretty quick schedule. So it's pretty rare that I write that far in advance. And also, will it be as broad appeal book that it would make sense for that expense? Now, there is a royalty share option where you can find a narrator and you split the revenue and there's no upfront cost. I want to throw that out there for people who were like heard $4,000 and went, oh no. There are ways you can narrate it yourself and then just have it engineered with just cheaper. There's lots of people out there who just buy a $50 snowball microphone and they pad their entire bathroom with foam or towels or whatever, and they can get it done. So don't let that stop you if audio is what you really want to do, especially if you have the talent for it and the voice for it, and particularly if it's memoir or nonfiction, where it is pretty common for the author to narrate their own book.
Right. Okay. So we've gone through the process of figuring out what formats. I'm exploring these platforms that I might use. I'm figuring out if I'm going to do audio or not. Let's talk about the editorial part of it. So, there used to be, and I'm so glad that this sort of stigma of self-publishing, that the world seems to have moved past where it was when I started in publishing and, when I was in publishing in the early 2000s, where there was an assumption about what the quality of that product might be. And part of it was that it probably hadn't been edited, that part of why you rely on a book editor is because they're going to actually take the manuscript and put it through, the ringer. But that's not the case anymore. So I would love for each of you to talk about that sort of revision process and the ways that you get the material into the best shape possible without having, an editor inside a publishing house. I'm assuming you either, do you work with freelance editors? Do you just, have you honed your editing skills in certain ways over the years? What does the editorial side of it look like for you in the self-publishing experience? Jacob, how about you?
So I will never, everybody may be different, but I will never trust myself to solely rely on myself to edit my book. It will not happen ever. I am always seeking editors. I really look for those who specialize in certain types of books. But I haven't really gotten to a point where I'm able to just use one editor. But yeah, I'm always searching for new editors, and I will never trust myself. I don't think any of us should, unless you're just the greatest in the world. But a lot of times when you write your story, we like to think that it's perfect, even though we know it's going to be far from it. But yeah, I will, of course, read over my work several times, over and over, before and after the editors. But yeah, I'm always trying to
And you're working
And I-
with different people, huh? Because you
Yeah.
are writing so many different types of books too. I think that's interesting that you also, it's like, all right, someone who might, their forte might be more in the kid space that I'm in, or the adult novels or the poetry or what have you.
Yeah, and I will also say that I like to think that as you release more books, and Deanna can probably say more than any of us because she has so many out there. But as you're going along and you're dealing with your editors, you kind of have to have thick skin because, like I said, we think it's going to be perfect, but then when you get that first draft back from your editor and you see all of the marks all over your writing, makes you want to break down. Like, what am I doing? What really am I doing with myself? But yeah, you have to be willing to go through that if you want the best version of your work to be out there in the world. You really do.
Yeah. Yeah. And Courtney, I see you agreeing in the chat box.
Yes, I am shaking my head. I'm totally agreeing with Jacob. I'm saying exactly. I would not trust my own eyes to review work and then distribute it in the world. Absolutely not. I hired an editor I wrote it, rewrote it, and then went through my own process with it, and then sent it to her to review and edit, and then give me feedback, and then I rewrote it some more, and then we went back and forth. And then when I thought it was finally done, like I shared before, I sat on it for about almost a year. And then at that point, I said, okay, Courtney, we're ready to really move forward and self-publish and print it, and then, share it with the world.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's another part of the process too. When you say you hired an editor, it's like, okay, now you're the publisher, but you're also hiring staff now. You're managing other people, and it's, building a little business around you and all the people that you need to help make it successful. Which is so important.
I really, this time, the very first time I went through the self-publishing process, I found it to be easier only because I worked with Lori Nelson Lee, who already self-published several books. And so I liked her work. And so I worked with her myself. And so she was like my coach. And so I thought, okay, she's done it. Okay, she's making this look very practical, very reasonable, that's affordable. I think I can do this too. And so the third time after, then I created my own homeroom number 104, my own company. I've never self-published anyone else's books, just mine. And so it really made it feel comfortable for me to step into it like, okay, I think I know what I should do for my books anyway.
That seems important too, as it is in any venture that we have, getting to know other people who have done it before you and finding those mentors or those folks who can share. And that's one of the reasons why we're so lucky that Deanna agrees again and again to come and teach classes, because it means so much for writers to hear directly from and connect with someone who's doing it. And to have all three of you here tonight is such an important part of that process too. So thank you. Deanna, what about you and the editorial side? I mean, I really admired too what you said earlier about the book. You had these books and you knew that they had gone through the workshopping and had gone through a lot of work. And so they were publishable because you'd done the work already.
Yes, so those, I still hired a line editor, copy editor to go through them before I published them, even though some of them had been workshopped so many times. My process at the beginning was a little more strenuous than it is now. At this point, I have different things I focus on. So I always have line editors and copy editors. Those are always going to be a part of my process. And I've gone through 6 or 7, and I always have 2 or 3 that I can turn to edit my book, and whoever's got availability, then we go. If I'm starting a new subgenre, for example, when I started writing suspense, and then again, when I turned to romantic comedy, I'll hire a developmental editor to go through my first book to make sure I've hit the right notes and I've met the expectations of this subgenre. I can read a lot of them, but sometimes I can't collectively make sure that I was always supposed to have a cat and a cozy mystery kind of thing. Like, was there some little detail that I didn't catch? And they'll help me do that. But at this point, now that I'm on my 8th romantic comedy, my main concern, more than typos, more than anything else, is it so funny in the first chapter, the people will absolutely buy it and keep going. And for that, I use alpha chapter 1 readers. I pull them from my fans. I'm lucky that I have a big fan group. So usually they all start to know that when I get about 2 months out on a release, they all like start getting their fingers ready, because it's open for about 2 hours that you'll be my first chapter alpha reader. And I go in my group and I say, first chapter alpha readers, it's time. Who wants to do it? I get about 25 volunteers. And then I say, this message will self-destruct, boom. And then I actually copy chapter 1 just into Facebook, into a private message. And they tell me either, because none of them will tell me it's bad because they're my fans, but they'll tell me, would I drop everything and read this right now? Had I read chapter 1, would I put it on my to be read list, or would I get to it when I got to it? And unless like all but 1 or 2 of them say they would drop everything to read this book, I rewrite chapter 1. And I often just rewrite chapter 1, because it's sometimes the first time I write chapter 1, it's good, but it's not good enough. So that's a huge part of my process now.
I feel like we all need an alpha first chapter reading group. I love that you're able to turn to them. And that's a good reminder to folks too, to start because we're going to go right now into how you build that audience, how you find those readers and how you keep them engaged and fans because especially if you're publishing book after book after book, having folks who are waiting for the next book. So we're going to stick with you to start, Deanna. So let's talk about finding the audience, whether it's ways that you think about, do you advertise? Do you, how do you make sure that readers know that your next book is coming out? And how did you do it from the beginning? We're not going to go year by year for 10 years, but what are some of the tips you might share with folks for today and thinking about how to start to build that audience?
The first thing I want to say is that my first 12 books barely earned out their expenses. So don't think that I'm some sort of superstar that just came with all these people. I was releasing all these books that were well done, but that didn't mean I knew how to market them. It took a long time to figure that out. One of the reasons that it's so great that we have classes now that you can kind of shortcut some of that and figure out what is the 20% you can do to get 80% of the results. And for me, that 20% that I do that gets 80% of the results is, one, I have a newsletter that they can sign up for. It's prominent on my website. It's in the back of all my books. Because you want to grab a super fan the minute they decide they love you. You don't want them to cool off. You don't want them to read another book and decide they love them better. No, you want them right then when they're hot for you at the end of your book, and you want to grab that email address if they're going to give it to you. Absolutely, my career was built on being told, Deanna, no matter what happens, book 13, Forever Innocent, make sure you have a sign up in the back of that book. And I'd never done it before for 12 books because I was like, I hate getting emails. And they were like shaking me, like, Deanna, you are not your fan. Your fan might want to hear from you. I'm like, okay, I'll do it. Kind of begrudgingly stuck. Here's where to sign up to find out about my next book. When I wasn't even sure I was going to write a next book. This was book 13. I was like, I got to get a job. I got to do something else. This isn't working, right? My kids were older. I was trying to make a go of this. And I was like, no, this is not happening. I'm just breaking even. And that was the book that hit. And if when I sold the first 700 copies in about 48 hours, I had not had that email sign up at the end, I wouldn't have had 650 of those suckers sign up to find out when my next book was out. And of course, when I saw that happen, I went, I got to write my next book. I'd never written a book faster than a year. I wrote a book in 2 flipping months, got it out, emailed all those people that the new book was out, and I sold exactly as many books as I did to the first one. And then I had a career. So if I could impress upon you anything, that email list is the most important thing you can do, because once you have that moment, you've got to get that lightning in the bottle so that you can keep using it to light your way.
Well, and I like that you're saying, it sounds like you use that email list to let people know something new is coming, but you're not are you forcing yourself to write a blog post every week that you share with everybody? I think sometimes we as writers think, oh my gosh, am I going to have to start sending a newsletter out? Because that's like a full-time job, putting a newsletter out, but you're truly just being smart and grabbing them and using them when you need to call, like for a call to action, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's no need to feel like the biggest thing I say, don't do anything you don't like doing, because when you're forced to do it, it comes across. People can see, they can feel it. They see it in your Facebook posts or your tweets or your TikTok videos, whatever it is. Be where you love to be. Now, you need to have a presence. You should have a Facebook page so that the fans can come and say their wonderful things about you. But that doesn't mean that it's something you do daily. To be honest, go look at my social media right now. I'm sitting here. I've not done anything for weeks because I'm writing a book. When it's time for me to gear up for the next release, usually about 3 to 4 weeks out, I start hitting it hard. I'm posting every day because then I'm like looking for the dollar signs, right? I know I'm working for the purpose of selling books. In between, it's okay. They don't forget you. They remember once you start gearing that up again. So don't feel like, oh, if I start doing blog posts, I'm going to have to do them every week for the rest of my life. That's not true. Go look at my blog. I don't think I've blogged for like a year. It's okay. It's okay to do what you love. The fans will still be there, but you do need to set it up and be ready for that lightning.
That's very freeing, I think, for people to hear. Jacob, what about you? What do you think about in terms of finding that audience, growing that audience? How do people find out about your next book?
So when I got started way back in the day, so like I said, moving past fear was a big thing for me. So when I released my first book, I actually didn't have any idea of how to market it, honestly. So what I would actually do was take my book, go to the mall. Everybody that I saw, hey, I have this book out. Do you want to talk about it? Because so I would sell. I actually was at a point where I was kind of in transition from my job at that point. So that hunger level was different. So yeah, I was talking to people in person. Hey, here's what I do. Here's my book. And at first, as everyone can probably tell you, since it was early on in the self-publishing thing, when people heard self-publishing, they would probably think that your book was like a pamphlet or stapled together like we did in elementary school or something very simple. But then when I showed them the book and they were like, oh, you actually have a book. So yeah, I'm interested. So from there, I knew that I wouldn't have any fear of talking to people about my work. And then that grew into doing more social media, things like that. But like Deanna said, you have to do what you're comfortable with and have everything set up where you can reach different audiences. But if you don't like to do dances, you don't have to go on TikTok and force yourself to hold your book and do the latest dance challenge to try to get it out there. You really don't. I mean, if you do, I'm sure you will gain more followers and people will love you for it, but that's not something that you have to do. Do what you love in the way that you love to do it. You can reach you will grow your audience in an organic way.
I actually met you for the first time at the Texas Book Festival because you were walking around with your book and talking to people, and you came up to the Writers League of Texas table, and I still remember it to this day. So it's, yeah, if that's something that you're comfortable with, to have that personality and that ease with talking to folks, I think that it's really great to hear that is one of the things that you started with, Jacob. Thank you.
No problem.
Courtney, how about you? What about, you know who your audience is, right? And you kind of let the audience, the fact, it was the realization of the audience that helped you to even decide to publish the book. And coming at it from that educator side, I imagine, I meet teachers, former teachers, folks in the education world all the time who have this sort of, easy group of people that they can share projects with and figure out if it is, a project that deserves to be published because it's got that audience already. So how for that kids market, were you thinking about broadening that and getting parents interested and getting other folks interested in your books?
Initially, Becca, I thought that I could write a book and then I could brush my hands like this. I'm done. Like, I wrote the book. And the people who are supposed to read the book will access the book, and then they'll get it some kind of way, some magical way. And that is so far from the truth. As a matter of fact, my fellow writer, Laura Nelson Lee, she said, she's like, Courtney, no, this is just the beginning. She's like, you finished writing and you actually have a book in hand, but this is just the beginning. And I felt at that point frustrated because I thought, what do you mean? I'm done. She's like, no, people are going to want to talk to you about the book, or just talk to you and ask you, what are you reading? What's the next book? And I just thought, I for some reason, I just never thought about those things. I was just focused on writing this one story, and that's it. And so, just like everyone else, the idea of like building a community. Now, with experience and listening to other writers, I understand very clearly that you're building your community. And for me, because I was a teacher, I'm connecting with other teachers and parents all the time, and getting the word out, asking them about their interests, what do their kids need? And then also, I took a step to create the East of the River Book Festival.
Yeah.
So that was a way not only to highlight my book, but really to highlight the books of other authors that were local authors, as well as authors that traveled to DC to be a part of it. And that all stemmed from going to the book festival sponsored by the Library of Congress. And at that time, this is, mind you, over a decade ago, probably about 15 years ago. And so I looked there and I thought, oh, I know, I'm going to look for some self-published books. And they didn't have any self-published. I didn't see any self-published. And I thought, one day I'm going to have my own. I'm going to have my own book festival. And I'm going to share books about, written by people, and there's only going to focus on self-published books. And so I did. And so when I did that, then the community became more clear to me. The people who wrote the books, self-published the books, and their kids, and a lot of them were teachers, and then they had connections to schools. And so it was this domino effect that, you knock over one, the next one falls, and then it just picked up. And then from there, having these like mini book festivals inside local malls, which is a really different experience, because then you're not just connecting with parents and families and teachers and people who work in schools, but then I started connecting more with just people. They may not have any kids, but they still like, the cover of your book. So it might have been just me and maybe 10 other authors. It may have been seasonal, around certain holidays at the mall, but you're getting all this foot traffic because people are at the mall shopping for all kinds of random things. And so that, to me, was a very different reader, because this reader is in the mall trying to go buy gym shoes. And so I'm going to stop and say, hey, what do you think about children's books? Would you like to come over and take a look? And so that was definitely, it was challenging and it's fascinating at the same time, because to me, it's like a cold call of trying to attract someone to your book.
I love that you mentioned the book festival that you started, because I think that is such a great thing for folks to also hear and be reminded of. If there's an event, if there's a way that you can promote your book that doesn't exist, it doesn't mean that you can't be the one to create it, right? And
Absolutely.
And also, in the kids space, and I mentioned that Jacob had done a class visit for us this week. That is another great way in that space to reach your audience, which is teachers and kids, is by doing school visits, and such a big
Absolutely.
part of the kids space too. So then let's move on to sales, because it's also then one of the things that is often said when you talk about traditional publishing versus indie publishing is, well, do you want your book in bookstores across the country? Do you want your book in the airport? Do you want your book, and having traditional publishing will always say, but remember, we have this distribution ability. We have the ability to put your books places. So I wanted to just hear your thoughts about that, about sales, about, have you developed relationships with bookstores? Have you, Deanna mentioned libraries. Librarians are another great place to think about where your book could live. Specialty markets. When you think about sales, I also think about pricing and how you think about the consumer and what the consumer is willing to spend. And, you mentioned this, Courtney, about the price of the paperback versus the price of the hardcover. So Deanna, I'm going to start with you on the sales side of things. What are the sort of conversations that you have with yourself and others when you're thinking about sales for your books?
Well, it's a huge thought process, because if you allow returns for your self-published book, you can end up with a lot of very expensive books either being destroyed or sent back to you that can completely wipe out your earnings. So it's an important consideration to think about it. Now, to get in Barnes & Noble or indie bookstores, you almost always have to allow returns, but it's risky. So it's a conversation you should have either with someone who's experienced to mentor you, or you should not allow returns and not risk it, because the likelihood that you'll be generally in bookstores is really low. The likelihood that you will be at a local bookstore in your area, if you go to them and talk to the purchasing manager, is a lot higher. But you can always sell them on consignment. I mean, Book People does that for us. And you don't have to worry about them ordering directly from Ingram Spark or Amazon's expanded distribution, which most indie bookstores refuse to do. And you can have that opportunity to be in their stores without taking the risk of Amazon or Barnes & Noble or somebody else ordering a ton of books and then getting them all returned. I don't have that problem too often, but occasionally I do. I have this huge behind me, that one just gigantic row of books of this one series that for whatever reason, they just really stocked up on. And I don't know, you don't know who did it. You don't know if it was Amazon or Barnes & Noble or some indie store, but if they don't sell them all, and if you're not really pushing, paperback sales, which I don't, I pushed ebook sales, they will get returned. And then suddenly got a big old shelf back there full of books I didn't expect to get. So it is a thought process. I focus on electronic books. The most paperbacks, I do sell a fair amount of paperbacks, but what gets me the most money is to have a store on my own website. And if you go to my website, you'll say get signed books from Deanna, and I can directly sell, because then I may have this markup that makes sense, because 55% isn't going to the other places, it's going to me. I see y'all nodding. You're like, yes, that is the way to do it. And that's what I do with those books back there. Every time I release a new book, I'm like, I'm having a sale in my store, catch up on all the other ones, signed copies, and I mark them down and they buy all of them at once. And I'm like, yes, I got rid of them.
What about pricing? Because I've heard you talk about pricing in the past, Deanna, and I'm just wondering how you figure out what to price your books at.
It's pretty straightforward if you're paying attention. For your ebook, you really need to go look at books like yours. Who's going to be the other books that people would buy? If you imagine a parent going into a store and buying 3 books and one of them is yours, what are the other 2 and how much do they cost? So if it's an adult romance, you got to go look, what is it? Are they romantic comedies? Or, it's going to be probably $3.99. If it's romantic suspense, well, it's probably going to be more like $4.99 or $5.99. And that could change next year from this year. You have to do your research at the point in which you are deciding your price and go with what the market value is at that moment for your ebooks. For your paperbacks and your hardcovers, it's completely, absolutely driven by the length of your book, how many pages are in it. If you're doing, hardcovers with wraps, or you're doing just the laminate cases, or if you're just doing paperbacks. And basically, my rule of thumb is that you have to make at least $2 profit when you're doing big distribution, not just like Amazon only, because that means that the bookstore is also at least making $2. And if they're not making that much money, then they're probably never going to stock your book, because they've got to make at least that much money. So when you're looking at those calculators in the back end, if you're getting $2, they're getting $2, probably it's going to work. That's my rule.
Courtney, how about you in terms of selling the book, how people were able to find it and buy it, your books? What does that look like? What's the distribution like?
First, I'd like to share that. So my book has been, after it's been completed, Jerry then would post it to Ingram Spark, right? So once he posted it there, if there's an independent bookstore, Barnes and Noble, they have to go through Ingram Spark to get copies of the book. Now, of course, there are indie bookstores that are here in Washington, D.C., and I have relationships. I've built up relationships with them over time, and so I'll deliver books to them. I have to tell you, though, I have had much success with connecting to schools, school districts, charter schools, nonprofit organizations. And it's been wonderful because they will order maybe 30 to 50 or more books at a time, or while I'm speaking to the students and we're doing activities or using the books in some way. And so that has worked out very well. Participating in book festivals has been great too. I mean, I think we're all familiar with, we're standing by our booth, or we're walking around, we're meeting people and guiding them over. I should say it's a trick, but it's more like wherever I speak or wherever I'm doing a workshop, I'm there with my books, because the strategy is that where I speak, I'm also reading. I'm also, sharing the book and the process of it. I absolutely have a website. So ultimately, I push my website and for readers to go to my website and order things off of the website. Because now that I'm so many years in, I feel like I put more effort into that website, and it's just more difficult. I think, some people say, well, I want my book in every store. And the reality of it is, can you really afford that? Can you afford to have your book in every store? Because just think of it like this. Usually there's about a 3-4 month contract for maybe 3 to 5 of your books. Particularly if it's an indie store. So they'll take 3 to 5 of your books. Are they going to sit on the shelf in that store? Could you sell your books faster? So it may be better for you to have those books and sell them versus them sitting on a shelf collecting dust. Because as you spoke to earlier, they're going to contact you at the end of 3 to 4 months to say, can you pick up your books? And then do what you need to because they're not selling here. And that's the ultimate call. You don't want that call. You want to be told, like, your check is on the way because we've sold all your books. Well, it happens to the best of us, though.
And also there are plenty of traditionally published authors who know you can walk into many bookstores and not find your book on the shelf in this bookstore. So that sort of thought that a book, is going to live in every store is not really
it's not
true.
It's not true. But it's hard because I've learned lots of hard lessons. It's one thing if you want to be a writer and you could write from your own home, and you could self-publish it. You can get copies from 1 to 500 books sent to your home. It's another deal for you to go out and sell your book. And you can sell books from your home nowadays, but it's something so different to go out there. And I like the idea of meeting people face to face now that we can see each other, at least half their faces, because book festivals are now starting to pop up more now that cities are opening up. But that face-to-face contact, that personal customer service, it's coming back in style now, thank goodness, so that you can actually meet the readers of your book and take pictures of them. But it has been a wake-up call as far as marketing your book. It is not easy. I've met plenty of people in classes that I've taught to say, well, I consider myself kind of shy and I don't really want to push. I wrote the story and I don't want to push it. I totally understand that thinking, but you can't do it. Do what's comfortable, but you're going to have to get out there, be online, be in person, do interviews, podcasts, that sort of thing, whatever's comfortable for you. Not everything, but right. You have to market it. You have to promote your book. You can have the most well-written book ever, but that's not going to make the bestsellers list though, or that's not even going to sell a few of the books. Right. That way. So we have to be very deliberate. Be very deliberate in promoting your book. You have to be.
So, and just to ask a question that is in the chat box for you, I think Deanna, you mentioned that you're fulfilling orders to your website yourself, right? Is that correct? Are you linking back to okay? And then Courtney, are you fulfilling yourself too? You're not linking to somewhere else? Okay.
No, I am. And I have to say that's also a bit of process. because initially I would have never, and I still have, it's only, I think A is for Anacostia is on Amazon.com, but that's really through Ingram Spark. And so when I was taught, or should I say, I learned this from fellow writers that, oh no, not the monster. You don't want to put your books on Amazon because it takes so much of the profit. But let me tell you, what's easy about that process is that Amazon will print the book for it and then will send it wherever you want it to be sent, because it is a chore to have, to go through, oh, I have to send this book, I have to go, oh, it's a hard copy, not a soft copy. And then you have to get the postage for it and then send it out. Let me tell you, that can be a very time-consuming task to make sure you're shipping your supplies out to the right person, to the right city. It shouldn't take a week to send all those things out. You have to be very deliberate and have a schedule to get those things done.
Yeah.
So it's just one more thing to do, but I'm just letting you know, just no surprises here. It's one more thing to do.
And these are all things for people to think about when they're even at that starting point of, oh, doing it myself, it's so easy. How
No, it's not easy.
No, it's
not easy.
Being aware of all of the different hats you're going to be wearing, including postal worker and marketer and that sort of thing. Jacob, what about sales for you? Where are people able to buy your books, and what are the sort of sales lessons that you've learned or the strategies that you've had for your publishing?
So like everyone else, mine is my work is pretty much available everywhere, but I always push it through my website. And Becca, like you said, when I first passed by the booth, I talked about my books then. Like if you see me out in public, there's a very good chance you will see me with a backpack and some books, no matter where that is. If you see me in public, there's a very good chance of that. But my website is where I always push my own work. And then if I'm at an event and someone says, well, I only deal with Amazon and, whatever the case may be, because that happens, then I let them know, hey, it's available on Amazon too, but I'm here with you right now. Here's where we can talk. And then I go into more about, the story and why it's important and why they want to get it at that point. Sure, if they decide later to go to Amazon, great. I mean, at the end, it's someone else that's going to be able to read what is put out there. But I definitely will always push my website more than anything else.
Yeah. Okay. Deanna, I felt like there's something you wanted to say. Yeah.
I admire Courtney and Jacob so much for their hand selling ability, because that's amazing. I can't do it. I won't do it. I do a couple book signings a year in non-COVID years, usually the literacy ones that are for donations, and I don't even make the money back. I can't do it. You asked me about my book. Yeah, I'll tell you, but I just can't. I just quit doing those things because I didn't enjoy it. My books are a little different. So because they're adult, and I just don't, everybody has their own taste. So I just want to say out there, you don't have to do that. I love that y'all do. I admire that, but I don't. I just wanted to throw that out there. I'd never ever.
Yeah. And I think it does go back to what you said, what I think each of you has mentioned tonight, which is you've got to find what works for you and what, not only what works for you, but what is your strength. And then, if it's not going to be one thing that feels like it could be productive and helpful, you got to find that other thing then that is going to be the thing that is for you. For sure. So I do want to get to some of the questions that we have in the Q&A box, because I want to make sure I don't miss offering some of these answers to folks. So one person is asking, for you, Courtney, how did you find the illustrator, and what did he cost you? So I'm not sure, who knows if you want to share exactly how much you spent on illustrations, but maybe even just giving folks an idea of what that can look like if you're a kids book writer.
Sure. Again, I'm going to tell you, like I said before, you all, if it was up to me, that book would have been full of illustrations of sticks, because there's no way I could do it myself. I wish I had that talent. There was no choice but to find an illustrator. So it's a great question. As far as finding one, because the first book I worked with Lori Nelson Lee, and she had like a team of illustrators, and so I had a few, right, to choose from. Let me share with you. So that the first illustrator that I worked with, she ended up she drew some illustrations, but I didn't quite like the style, and so I ended up not working with her, even though she drew maybe 2 or 3 illustrations. And so I didn't like it, and so we ended the contract, and so I ended up going back and saying, okay, I think I need another illustrator because the first one didn't work out. But I want to share that just because it's okay if you don't know what you want. Then someone gives you what they think you want, and it still doesn't work, and that's so important because now you've collected some more information, and now you know, okay, I don't want that. I want something else. I then started working with Jerry Craft. And then when I saw his illustrations, and I had him include some more things that were specific to DC, like our cherry blossoms and illustrations, and I was sold. And I thought, oh my goodness, I really like his illustrations. And then we started working together, and it was a great relationship. For an entire book, and I'm talking about from the editing all the way up to illustrations plus marketing things. Because, I started this way before this whole buying ads on Facebook and that sort of thing. I don't typically do that. I would say to self-publish a children's book, because so much falls on illustration, I'm going to say it could be as high as like 10,000. I would say 8 to 10, but I'd say that's really, 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 that's almost too low.
The whole experience or for the illustrations alone?
No, for the whole,
whole thing.
Yeah, but I would say most of that money, though, it goes to the illustrations.
Sure.
And I'll say this, because it is not my experience to work with like a Fiverr or Upwork or an organization, that kind of company where you can look and you can start. I have $200 and I want someone to illustrate my book for $200 or $500 or even $1,000. Well, you have to think of the hours that it takes to illustrate each page. Do you want that image to spread across 2 pages? What about the placement of the words? I mean, if you're writing a children's book, we have to know, how is that little finger going to follow the words and the punctuation marks? Is it in between the pictures or on top of them? Will it fade out, or will there be kind of like this little white space there? All of that, we take that into consideration, and you want your illustrator to be aware of those things too. Mm-hmm. So a more experienced illustrator usually has higher prices. Somebody who's been in the field a while, who's created not only several images, but has different styles for you to choose from. Doesn't just have one kind of style. And so I would argue that right now, just like there's a teacher shortage, there is an illustrator shortage, or at least the place to find an illustrator that isn't so expensive. And you want someone who's so talented. Well, if they're so talented, they're not going to cost $1,000. I can tell you that. Not, because here's the thing, when you're using companies, someone said, well, just send me $500 and we can be done. And I'll make sure you have the most perfect pictures ever. Well, then you have to ask yourself, are they licensed to you? So are you the only one that will have those images in your book? Yeah. Surprise, surprise. There are writers, they have a certain style and image. And I've seen that exact same cover on 3 different books. And they were surprised when they saw their cover, and they went to a book festival and they saw their cover on someone else's book. It wasn't, they didn't own it. Yeah. So that's something else to consider. Not only how much is it yours? Do you own it? And guess what? If I want that image of my book on a t-shirt or a mug, is it mine to put on a t-shirt or a mug? So these are all things that artist, that illustrator, you need to work that out with that illustrator. Well,
And this is exactly one of the questions we have in the chat box, which is, describing any liabilities, legal, et cetera, to consider when you self-publish. And, that is another hat that you wear as a self-published author, is that, person who's negotiating contracts, person who's reading contracts, ideally, maybe you have some help with that. But are there other things in that space? Someone asked about copywriting your work. Is that something that's pretty easy to do when you're doing it yourself as a self-published author? And then also, have any of you, and I think that I believe this is the case for each of you, but creating, when you decide to create a formal business versus doing everything specifically under your own name. So I'm looking, I think Courtney just touched on some really great stuff. What about, Deanna, for you, some of these other things about copywriting and becoming a more formalized business?
So I had created an LLC before I self-published because there was one book I wanted to do that I couldn't sell. It needed to be a color book. It needed to have YRO centers and a hardcover. It was a very specific thing that even now you can't print on demand, and I wanted to print run from China. So I created the LLC for that. So I already had it when I started self-publishing. I say that, but I also self-published just under my human name. It just depends on, because I have my publishing company and it's branded to certain books. And then there's books that are outliers and I don't put them through my press. I put them just out as a human. So you can do it either way. For Ingram Spark, for your paperbacks and hardcovers, and for Kindle and Apple and Google Play and all those, you can just be a human being and you can just do your things. Liability wise, a pass-through LLC isn't really going to help you that much. If they're going to sue you, they're going to sue you. We don't see that a lot. I mean, I've been pretty involved in the self-publishing community for a decade, and we don't see lawsuits. We do see people, perhaps if you've gone to Pixabay or someplace where you can get a free image and then you use it on your cover. We have seen people who actually own that image and didn't know it was uploaded to Pixabay. So even though you thought you were getting it okay, like it's from Pixabay, I have this little thing, it wasn't legally uploaded there, and your book comes down. If they tell Amazon that's my copyright, Amazon has this blanket thing where a book comes down, get your lawyers, tell us when you're done. They do not care to hear your story. They just wait till there's paperwork that they can look at and say, okay, we're all right. Mm-hmm. If you are buying your covers, whether it's an illustration or a cover from a legitimate stock site, and that can be as cheap as $10 or as much as $500, you're going to be okay, because they are vetting those people and those images before they go on. So if your money is exchanging hands for your cover, you're fine. Now, there's a whole nother kettle of fish like Courtney brought up about T-shirts and mugs and using them for those kind of things. That's a different type of licensing. But as far as your book cover, if you get your cover from a legitimate photo or illustration source, you don't have to worry. And honestly, these are things that we can talk about and be worried about, but we don't really have to. Your book is copyrighted when you write it. You can file for copyright. I recommend doing that. But the reason that you file for copyright with the government is so that if there is a lawsuit, you get more damages. That's what it's for. Proving that it's yours and those things. We've seen Amazon reject copyright form notices from the government if there's a real fight, because again, they're like, go to court, tell us when you're done. So it's not necessarily the protection you think it is. The best case scenario is just to be involved in the indie community, to be in the places where indie authors talk to each other, and you will start to pick up and ask questions. And that's where you can really get the information you need when you need it. Because if you try to learn it all in one day, or a panel or 10 panels, or even if you studied for 3 months, you're still going to have 1,000 things you would need to know. The best thing to do generally is to get started and let those questions come as they come, and surround yourself with an indie community that can help you answer those questions.
So last question, and I'm going to start with you, Jacob. What is the biggest thing, the biggest surprise you've had in this process? The thing you've learned about yourself, the thing you've learned about, your experience as a writer or the publishing world, readers. What is the biggest surprise you've had that maybe others will appreciate hearing for insight, or just to hear, okay, I'm not alone in terms of the way I'm surprised?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I've learned is that this whole writing journey is not easy. So even if you are in your mind the best writer in the world, and you find yourself struggling, whether it be through the actual writing process or once you have the book out, I promise you, you are not alone. We all deal with that struggle at some point of trying to find our audience, trying to grow our audience, trying to make sure our book is good enough, or even dealing with imposter syndrome. Like, I shouldn't be here. My work is really not good enough for me to put it out into the world. If you ever feel like that, I promise you, you're not alone. Your work is good enough. You should put it out. We need to read your work. And so I've heard people tell me, even with the differenters, the book that you have advertised for me, that their child liked it to a point where they shared it with their friend, and their friend was so helped out by it that they shared that book with their therapist. So like, you those type of experiences you won't get until you actually experience the journey itself, and you will struggle. But in the end, if you find one person who enjoys your work, it will be all worth it. That's what I've learned.
Thank you. How about you, Deanna?
I didn't know what I was capable of until I had to do more. I always thought I'm a writer, and I was that kind of person who thought, I'm going to write the book, it's going to get published, and I'm going to be a superstar. And I never thought about like all the little individual steps that it would take to get there. And that's true whether you go traditional or you go self-published. It's not as though it's a magic thing that somebody showers all this adulation on you and you're done. There's work to be done no matter how you do it. The difference that self-publishing gave me is I was in control of it. I could decide if I'm going to work till 2 a.m. and push my own business. And that's what it's become. It's not just me writing books, it's my life. I didn't know that it was going to be my whole life. And I didn't know that it was going to matter so much, because now my life is my job, is my aspiration, is my love, is my fear. All of this stuff has wrapped together to create a person who is a creator. And I didn't know that I could do so much and that I could be so rounded until I got in there and I learned what I needed to do and I got it done.
Yeah. Thank you. Courtney, how about you?
I would say it's so important to know your why during this process. Why do you want to write this book? Because I honestly think everyone has, I think Jacob said it earlier, everyone has a story to tell. Everyone has at least one good book. And if you want that one book to be a holiday book for your family, fantastic. That's the book you take to Kinko's. You make a couple of copies of it and then you pass it out as a gift to everyone. But if you want to create something, create a gift for the masses, then it's going to take some heavy lifting. Writing is just one skill. One skill. But when you want to self-publish, now you're going to talk about multiple skills. You don't have to master every single one. And there are coaches and there are mentors. And it is a wonderful community that is built around self-publishing that you can be a part of. But I think it's the why that is going to keep you rooted, because if your why isn't deep enough, this is going to be just a fleeting thought. And then, after that one story, then you're done. And I think to Deanna's part, that if you think you want it to be a business, you're taking on so many more, so many more lessons are coming your way. And there's a lot of heavy lifting involved, but everyone is capable of doing it. If you decide if that's what you want to do, it's within you to do it.
As I was reading up on just what folks have been saying about self-publishing in the last few years, and I was reading a lot of articles and opinion pieces, and one person said, you go into a dinner party and it's all traditionally published authors, and they're all so beaten down. They're talking about what disappointments they've had with their editor, or what's happening in their publishing house, or what happened with that bookstore event, or what have you. And you go to a dinner party with self-published authors, And there's so much joy and empowerment and kind of just the energy of it is so different. And I think that's a super simplistic way to talk about the two. And I am not, there are many authors who are published traditionally who are not at that first dinner party. But I just want to say, being here with you all tonight has been so such a treat, and to hear you talk about what you do with such honesty, but also with just such clear passion for it is a real honor. So I just want to thank you all for being here. And I know, for those of you who are interested, Deanna's class this weekend, I know is going to be awesome. I'm not even going to ask her to talk about it because she's done so much tonight already to give you an idea of what you're going to get. But there's that class this weekend. We'll make sure you get the recording for tonight's event. And I hope we get to spend more time soon with all three of you. But for now, thank you for taking the time. Thank you everyone who is here for being here. Jacob, yes.
But before we go, I need to say something to Deanna and Courtney. I just want to say I'm very grateful for being on the panel with you all. Both of you all are an inspiration to me to continue with this. Courtney, I actually tried to be a part of your festival a while back, but I couldn't make it to where it was. So I still want to do that at some point. Deanna, the sheer volume of books that you have is amazing. And the way that you've continued, like I said, is motivation. And Becca, thank you for including me. I just wanted to put that out there. I really appreciate all of you.
Oh my gosh, you're so welcome. We're thrilled to have you here, and I will always include you in anything you want to be a part of. So count on it. Cool. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here and for spending your time with us. And I hope I see you all again very soon. Have a great night. Bye, guys.
Thank you and good night.
Bye.
Good night.